You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Today, on the 43rd edition of the Useless Information Retrocast, I've got another lineup of fascinating and completely true stories for you. You'll hear about a young boy who fell into a sewer tunnel only to be carried by the rushing current for 2.5 miles underground. Or how about a complaint filed with the San Jose Labor Commissioner because a nudist colony refused to pay its laundry bill? And then there's the story of Al Capone Jr., who became so frustrated living in the shadow of his infamous father that he finally decided to do something about it. Well, all those stories, the question of the day, today's retro sponsor, and so much more, they're all coming up next. I'm Steve Silverman, and this is the Useless Information Podcast.
Useless information.
And let's dive right in. This first story begins on June 24th of 1956. That's when 32-year-old Susie Mae Stroud was driving a blue 1950 Buick along Washington Street in Akron, Ohio. Then, without warning, she lost control of the car, crashed into two other vehicles, and then finally slammed into a utility pole. The car, it was totaled. The Buick belonged to a guy named Jimmy Smith who had loaned it to Mrs. Stroud. Now his wife, Julia Smith, she was riding in the car at the time, and fortunately no one was injured. There was one major problem, however. Jimmy Smith had no insurance on his car. So when the owner of one of the damaged vehicles demanded $200 in compensation, which is around $2,300 today, Smith couldn't afford to pay. As a result, the state of Ohio suspended his driver's license until that debt was satisfied. Now, with Smith being the most common surname in the United States, it probably won't surprise you to learn that Akron was home to more than one James Smith during the 1950s. In fact, when the Akron Beacon-Journal reported on this story on December 5th of 1957, the newspaper checked the city directory and found that there were 68 James Smiths living in Greater Akron. Add in 2 Jimmys and 1 Jim, and the total climbs to 71 James Smiths. And that brings us to a different James Smith, James Wilbur Smith. On September 3rd of 1957, he stopped by the Akron Auto Club to renew his driver's license. And everything appeared to be routine until October 1st. That's when he received a letter from Roger W. Friend. He was the head of the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and the letter informed him that his driver's license had been revoked. That's because he had failed to pay damages resulting from an automobile accident. A second letter identified the accident as the one that had occurred the previous year on Washington Street. So Smith immediately wrote back explaining to the state that they had the wrong man. Well, their response was hardly reassuring. State officials informed him that the only way to regain his license was to either pay the $200 or post a bond for the same amount while he appealed the decision. So what did Smith do? He hired an attorney. That was Marion E. Snyder. And Snyder contacted the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and explained that they had mistaken his client for someone else. He enclosed a copy of the police report along with a sworn affidavit in which James Smith said he had never been involved in a car accident, he had never owned a Buick, had always carried insurance on his vehicles, and he had never lived at the address of the Jimmy Smith whose car had been involved in the crash. Meanwhile, the Akron Beacon-Journal tracked down the real Jimmy Smith at his workplace, and he confirmed,
"Yes, I own that car and I let Mrs. Stroud drive it. No, I never got a letter about my license. No, I haven't paid the damages because Mrs. Stroud and her husband said they would pay me for my car, and I haven't gotten the money yet."
Smith explained that he had purchased a Buick just 3 months before the accident for $345, which is roughly $4,200 today. As I already mentioned, the collision totaled the car, and because he couldn't afford to replace it, he had been riding the bus to work every day since. When a reporter told him that another Jimmy Smith was being denied his driver's license because of the mix-up, he replied,
"That sure ain't right."
The newspaper couldn't help but wonder how the state had confused the two men. You see, not only didn't they live in the same part of town, But the Jimmy Smith who owned the Buick, he was 60 years old and African American, while the mistaken James Wilbur Smith, he was a 47-year-old white man. You can probably guess what happened next. The day after the story appeared in the newspaper, Motor Vehicles Chief Roger Friend announced,
"We'll try to get Mr. Smith's papers in the mail this afternoon. He should have his license in a few days."
One of the fascinating features of Google Maps is the ability to switch from map view to satellite view, of course giving you a bird's eye look at the landscape below. And that's exactly what I did while I was researching the story I'm about to tell you. Using the satellite imagery, I followed Mill Creek, which is a tributary of Lake Erie, from its source for roughly 16.5 miles or 26.5 kilometers. But then, as the creek reaches the city of Erie, Pennsylvania, it suddenly vanishes from sight. Of course, it doesn't really disappear. The reason is that Mill Creek is diverted into a concrete tunnel, and then it flows beneath the city for about 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers, and finally it empties into Lake Erie near Presque Isle Bay. The tunnel was constructed between 1918 and 1923 after a devastating flood struck Erie on August 3rd of 1915. Although the project successfully controlled the flooding, the tunnel itself is a place few people would ever want to enter. And aside from inspectors, almost no one goes inside. It's extremely dark, it has only 17 manhole covers along its entire length, and during heavy rainstorms the water can rise quickly and become dangerously deep and turbulent. It was also no place for children to be playing. Yet at around 4 p.m. on Wednesday, February 10th of 1960, that's exactly what a group of boys was doing. Among them was 11-year-old Robert Fisher-Kowski, who watched as his 9-year-old friend Virgil Swartwood waded into the water and headed toward the entrance of the flood and sewage control tunnel. Then, when Robert looked again moments later, Virgil had vanished. Assuming that his friend had simply gone home, Robert left the area. But then a short time later, he stopped by the Swartwood home, which was at 2109 State Street, and he told Virgil's mother about his mysterious disappearance. Alarmed Mrs. Swartwood and Robert, they rushed to the tunnel entrance and they searched desperately for the missing boy, but there was no sign of him. At about the same time, this is roughly 30 minutes after Virgil disappeared, boat operator Joseph Bowery heard the faint cries of what sounded like a child near the tunnel's outlet into Lake Erie. Looking toward the discharge point, he spotted Virgil clinging to a 4-foot or 1.2 meter long tree branch. Immediately, he ran to a nearby sewage treatment plant, shouting for help. And without hesitation, a 50-year-old plant worker named John Gricholski, he dropped himself from a 15-foot or 4.6 meter high wall down into the near-freezing water below. He then kept Virgil's head above the surface for nearly 20 minutes. That's until a small boat arrived and rescued the two of them. And from there, the semi-conscious boy was rushed to nearby Hammett Hospital. Gricholski later told a reporter,
"I never would have slept peacefully in my life again if the kid had gone under. All I knew was that I'd better get him out of there."
From his hospital bed, the third grader explained that he had bent down to pick up a friend's glove.
Then I fell down and I could not get up again. I tried to stop myself by hanging onto the sides, but I couldn't stay there. A couple of times my head went under and I tried to hold my breath, but I got some water in my mouth. The rest of the time I hollered all the way. I counted as 60 15 times. I knew that there was 60 seconds a minute. I figured I had to come out somewhere, but I was scared. I was scared I would drown or might fall through a manhole. I passed over some. I tried so hard to stop, but I couldn't.
Remarkably, Virgil escaped with only bruised and battered hands, and those were injuries he sustained while desperately trying to grip the tunnel walls as the rushing water carried him on a terrifying 2.5-mile journey beneath the city. I've never told anyone this, but I'm a descendant of the infamous Silverman crime family. And my family's life of crime began during the Great Depression when times were tight. You see, my dad's parents were notorious thieves, and I didn't realize this until I was older just how good they were at it. Yet from the day I was born, the proof had been staring me right in the face. You see, every time that I went to their house and had a meal with them, I was completely unaware that every single packet of salt, pepper, and sugar that they ever placed on the table, it had been taken from some restaurant somewhere. Plus, the same thing was true about the napkins. I would venture a guess that it was their thievery that was, in part, responsible for sugar reaching its highest cost per pound ever back in 1980. And I have to tell you, I've spent my entire life trying to outrun their criminal past. Anyone who enters my home can be certain that I purchase all the salt, pepper, sugar, and napkins that my wife and I use. Of course, I'm just joking around here. While it is true that my grandparents did have all those things on their kitchen table, the reality was that they struggled through periods of financial hardship, and that's where they picked up the habit of taking those extra things while dining at restaurants. And I should add, they did eat in those restaurants. Now, imagine really growing up as the son of one of America's most infamous gangsters. I'm talking about Al Capone. You know, he's the Chicago crime boss that's widely believed to have orchestrated the notorious February 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre. As if being his son wasn't enough, Capone gave his only child the very same name that he had, Albert Francis Capone, or Al Capone Jr., although his father simply referred to him as Sonny. Of course, it would have been easy for the younger Capone to follow in his father's criminal footsteps, but he decided to choose a different path. He wanted to live an honest, respectable life, but unfortunately escaping his family's name, that would prove nearly impossible. Sonny attended the prestigious St. Patrick's School in Miami Beach, Florida, where one of his classmates was none other than Desi Arnaz. Maybe you've heard of him. And if you haven't, years later, Arnaz and his future wife Lucille Ball, they would create the hit television series I Love Lucy and establish their Desilu Productions. After graduating, Sonny studied at the University of Notre Dame before completing his education at the University of Miami in 1937. And he spent much of his adult life taking ordinary jobs. At one point, he worked as a used car salesman, but resigned after discovering that his employer had been rolling back the vehicle odometers. He also worked alongside his mother in a restaurant, apprenticed as a printer, and even distributed tires at one point. As you can see, in every way he could, Sonny tried to build himself a quiet and humble life. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he could never escape being Al Capone's son, and that reality came crashing back into his life on two notable occasions. The first was in 1959. That's when Desilu Productions premiered the hit television series The Untouchables, which dramatized Eliot Ness's effort to dismantle Al Capone's Chicago bootlegging empire. Sonny and his mother were outraged by what they considered to be an unfair portrayal of Capone, who had died 12 years prior. And to make matters worse, the series was being produced by Sonny's old school friend Desi Arnaz, who he hadn't seen in years. Claiming the publicity would bring unwanted attention to his mother and his 4 daughters who had never been told about their grandfather's criminal past, Sonny filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Desilu Productions, although he was unsuccessful in doing so. The second incident was far less dramatic, but equally damaging. Sonny was arrested for stealing $3.50 worth of merchandise from a grocery store. That's about $37 in today's money. And after his conviction, newspapers eagerly drew comparisons between his petty theft and the far more notorious crimes of his father, and of course that thrust him right back into the unwanted spotlight. The stigma finally became too much to bear. On Thursday, April 7th of 1966, Sonny appeared in a Fort Lauderdale courtroom and petitioned to legally drop the surname of Capone. His request was granted, and for the rest of his life he lived under a different name. Nearly 4 decades later, that's on July 8th of 2004, an 85-year-old man named Albert Francis Brown died in Auburn Lake Trails, California. Aside from his 3rd wife and 4 daughters, it's doubtful that anyone there knew that they were mourning the one and only son of Al Capone. I clearly remember the first time I ever got to use a computer. It was back in 1980, and that's when my dad's brother Marvin went on vacation, and he left his brand new Atari 800 computer with us for a few days. And he came with a whopping 16 kilobytes of memory. Just compare that with the gigabytes of memory you get standard in even your cell phone today. Anyway, from that day on, I knew I wanted to someday own a computer of my own. But of course, they were quite costly back then, and while I'd certainly use a number of different models over the decade, none of them were mine. I wouldn't purchase my own computer until I became a teacher in 1991. Today, of course, computers are ubiquitous, from powerful cell phones in our pockets to the laptops and desktops we use for business to the really large banks of computers that power the internet and emerging AI technology. They are just everywhere. So I have a very simple question for you. In what year was the first computer offered as a consumer product? When could you purchase one for household use? Well, hang around for a bit and I'll let you know the answer at the end of this podcast.
The other day I rode home in the bus behind two housewives who were discussing their favorite topic, their husbands. One woman said,
"One thing I can't seem to do is make coffee that John likes. And yet I've tried brand after brand."
Well, Helen, most men are terribly particular when it comes to coffee. I had the same trouble as you until I hit on Maxwell House.
Friends, Maxwell House does make a marvelous cup of coffee. So if you've had trouble pleasing your husband with the coffee you serve, why don't you try Maxwell House? It's the one coffee most men like. They like its rich, mellow flavor. They like its full-bodied goodness. They like that feeling it brings of deep-down satisfaction. Now, that's because Maxwell House coffee is a superb blend of coffees to begin with. Then it's packed in the super vacuum can so it reaches you with all its flavor and goodness sealed in, roaster fresh whenever and wherever you buy it. We offer you Maxwell House in a choice of two grinds, the special drip grind for all drip and glass coffee makers, the regular grind for percolator or boiled coffee, because we know how important it is to use the right grind for the way you make your coffee. And then we offer Maxwell House in 1 and 2 pound cans. If you use lots of coffee, you'll find it thrifty to buy the 2 pound size. So choose Maxwell House tomorrow. See if you both don't get more real pleasure from this coffee that's truly good to the last drop.
That Maxwell House coffee commercial comes from the 27th episode of the Good News of 1938 radio series, which aired on the NBC network on May 5th of 1938. The program itself, it ran from November 4th of 1937 through July 25th of 1940 and was produced by MGM Studios, the film studio. Maxwell House was the show's sole sponsor, and they paid $25,000 a week for that privilege. That's around $594,000 in today's money. Wow. Of course, the title did change from year to year to match the calendar, so there was Good News of 1937, Good News of 1938, and so on. It was a typical variety show of the era featuring music, comedy, celebrity interviews, and other entertainment. Naturally, one of its primary purposes was to promote MGM's latest films. One feature that set Good News apart was its promise to give listeners a behind-the-scenes look at Hollywood. Audiences were supposedly taken into the movie stars' dressing rooms and even allowed to eavesdrop on the conversations that were taking place in the MGM boardroom. In reality, of course, these segments are almost certainly scripted and fictional, but listeners just love the illusion of getting an insider's glimpse of the movie business. As for Maxwell House Coffee, it was introduced in 1892 by wholesale grocer Joel Owsley Cheek. He named the brand after his first major customer, that was the Maxwell House Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, according to the story, Cheek gave one of the hotel's buyers a free 20-pound or 9.1 kilogram bag of his special coffee blend. And after the hotel used that bag up, it switched back to its regular coffee. But guests immediately noticed the difference and complained, and that prompted the hotel to purchase Cheek's blend exclusively. Then 6 months later, the hotel agreed to let him use its name for his coffee. It's kind of a win-win situation for both if you think about it, because the hotel, of course, is getting free publicity every time he sells a bag of the coffee to someone else. On the other hand, the coffee became famous at the hotel, and that's allowing him to sell more. Maxwell House remained America's best-selling coffee brand through the late 1980s, but its decline came as consumer tastes shifted. Beginning in the 1960s, more Americans developed a preference for specialty and artisanal coffees with richer, more complex flavors. As for me, what do I prefer? I don't. Believe it or not, I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. I love the scent, I love the smell of freshly brewed coffee, but I just do not like the taste. And now we're up to the portion of the podcast where I'm going to share 5 footnotes to history. I've selected these from all the shorter tidbits that I've come across in all my years of researching for this podcast. And since they require no further research on my part, I'm just going to read them exactly as they were printed decades ago. And this first one was published on October 3rd of 1900 in the Hartford Courant on page 14. The headline reads, "The Sandbag Hit the Parachute," and this was taken from the Cincinnati Enquirer, Lafayette, Indiana, September 29th. George Whittlesey had a remarkable escape from death this afternoon while making a balloon ascension. When 3,000 feet or 914 meters high, he cut loose, the parachute opening nicely after a drop of 50 feet or 15.2 meters, when the sandbag used in overturning the balloon broke loose and fell, striking the parachute on top and closing it. Whittlesey fell fully 500 feet or 152.4 meters with lightning speed before the parachute reopened, after which he landed safely in the meadow adjoining the Carnival Midway grounds. People were awestricken when the bag struck the parachute, the bag passing on down and missing the daring aeronaut by a close margin. Next up, we have a story that was printed on February 14th of 1905 in the Daily Mirror, that's in London, on page 10. In all capital letters across the top, it goes, "Eat curdled milk and live long." And I should mention this is about yogurt, even though it says yagurt. The latest food craze is curdled milk of a special kind prepared on a Bulgarian recipe. It is the new remedy against growing old. The substance is called yagurt and can now be obtained in tins in Paris. It is supposed to be fatal to all hostile bacteria in the intestines, while friendly microbes thrive upon it. Yagurt looks like ordinary cream cheese gone bad and tastes similarly. People who wish to live to 100 breakfast off yagurt exclusively, but many who have tried it prefer to die young. Next, we have a story that appeared on page 14 of the San Jose News on June 20th of 1934. The headline on this one reads, "Nudists Pay Salaries for Laundry Work." Deputy Labor Commissioner George Moody faced a new problem here, but finally cleared it up when Mr. and Mrs. Harry McDonald and 2 minor children filed complaints against a nudist colony near Soquel for $527.99. That's roughly $13,200 today. The strangest part of the claim was the fact that a portion of the bill was for doing the laundering for nudist officials. Mr. McDonald is said to have cleared a section of land, and the children had removed poison oak from paths about the nudist camp. Fully clothed, officials accompanied by several feminine members of the colony appeared at Moody's office, and after due arbitration, the parties compromised for $215. That's roughly $5,400 today. Next, I have a story that was printed on June 11th of 1951 in the Jackson Sun on page 9. The heading on this one reads, "Bum steer dope leads to dead-end foot race." Quincy, Massachusetts, June 11th, Associated Press. One of the biggest bum steers in a long time brought a 10-mile road race to a dead end yesterday. 10 miles is around 16.1 kilometers. 40 runners broke away from Municipal Stadium in the annual Knights of Columbus jaunt, and at the first marker, 2 men had spurted well out front. As they started to make a turn on the course, 2 boys standing by the roadside yelled, "Hey, that's the wrong way!" The runners pulled up for a second, then took off in the direction the boys pointed. Minutes later, the two were smack up against a dead-end street, and minutes after that, the whole field was pulling up behind, and all was confusion. It was so bad that officials said the race would be run over again next Sunday. What about the two boys? They went that-a-way. And the last tidbit for today was printed on October 11th, 1962 in the Racine Journal-Times on page 14. The headline on this one was "No Need to Raise the Roof, Detroit Associated Press." Steve Orlasky came home from a hunting trip to find a new roof on his house. The roofing contractor said that the warehouse had delivered the material to Orlasky's house instead of the one across the street where it was supposed to go. The roofers came along and put the new roof on the house where they found the material. No charge, the contractor said. Quote, "The Santa Claus is fine," Orlasky said, "but I wish it had been something I needed. There was nothing wrong with the roof." Unquote. So early in the podcast, I asked you when the first computer was marketed as a consumer product for use in the home. Do you have any idea? Well, the answer was 1969. That's when the Honeywell kitchen computer was introduced. In reality, it was just simply a rebranded version of Honeywell's Model 316 business computer, and this pedestal model weighed in at a whopping 100 pounds or 45.5 kilograms. Owning one, however, wasn't exactly affordable. That's because Neiman Marcus offered the kitchen computer for $10,600. If you adjust that for inflation, that's nearly $97,000 today. And just what did this computer do? Not a whole heck of a lot. Its functionality was limited to pre-programmed recipes and basic numerical calculations. Think calculator. And I should add that it wasn't easy to use. It lacked a keyboard and a monitor and a mouse, nothing like what we know today. To use it, one needed to take a 2-week programming course, and I should point out that was included in the price of the computer, and you took the course to master its toggle switch inputs and binary light outputs. Now, no one knows for certain whether Neiman Marcus ever sold a single kitchen computer. Most people think not. It was just really one of those crazy, extravagant gift ideas that they were so famous for including in their catalogs, but it still made history by offering the world's first home computer for sale. And with that, I'll bring this episode of the Retrocast to a close. I do hope you enjoyed the stories that I selected today. Just a reminder that the Useless Information Podcast is proud to be part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network, so be sure to visit airwavemedia.com to explore their ever-growing collection of some of the very best podcasts out there. Anyway, thanks for listening and take care, everyone. Bye.